Coogs house. Okay, yesterday I spoke so confidently about who would and wouldn't be back and who would and wouldn't return to the Houston Cougars. And so, of course, someone we thought would return is not.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. We should make your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you can join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. I'm torn here from a couple different things to ask you. But because I think of Beaumont and crawfish boils for a number of different personal reasons growing up, tell us your favorite part of the crawfish boil is in the comment section. Today's show, we're going to talk some about TurboTax later, but that is later because the news of the day is Terrance Arceneaux hitting the transfer portal. I want to talk about that portal movement. I want to talk about who else could be jumping in. And then, bluntly, I want to talk about the news of the week that kind of never happened, but also kind of happened the whole time, about money, Big 12, all of that. But that's the third segment. Second segment is who else could be going, because the first segment is that Terrance Arceneaux is hitting the transfer portal. Now, I want to talk about a couple different aspects of this. One, I want to talk about just that this is something we could have seen coming. If we're reading between the lines here, He didn't get quite the minutes this year he might have hoped for. The next year's roster is going to have a bunch of young talent at very similar positions. I will point out that Terrance was very impactful on the winning in this team. It felt like he threw the ultimate haymaker when he came in for a foul trouble Jawan Roberts in the Elite Eight game against Tennessee, and he came with 8 straight points off the bench. And they're like, "Oh, we can't cover this guy either. What are we going to do?" He had moments like that throughout the season. He also had moments where he just couldn't get the ball in his hands in the right spots on offense. I would argue he's a pretty strong defender on that end all season long. I think the thing that makes this the most odd, before we get to his announcement post in a second, is that he had just told Paper City Magazine earlier in the week that he'd like to come back, or something to that effect. The quotes behind the paywall, but something to the effect of he'd be back if they take he wanted to be back. There was something like that, right? And that's a little odd, but also it's been an emotional roller coaster of a week. He's coming off of a all-time great season with his boys. They were so close. The emotions were likely high. And then he said in a Twitter post on, was it Thursday, after much prayer, reflection, and conversation with with the people closest to me, I've officially decided to enter the transfer portal and begin a new chapter in my college basketball journey. Playing at the University of Houston has been a part of my story that I'll always carry with me. I'm thankful for the experience, the teammates who turned to family, the fans who support us through every win and loss, and the coaches who challenged me to grow both on and off the court and shaped me into who I am today. And walk away with no bitterness, just growth, gratitude, and a clear vision for where I'm headed next. Sometimes the path to purpose requires a pivot, and I'm trusting the process. Terrance Arceneaux. I love the idea that the path requiring a pivot, because I think that's kind of a thing that takes a lot of leap of faith aspects to go do right now. I'm still super high on Terrance Arceneaux as far as a lot of things go. I was incredibly impressed with him as a freshman. I talked on the show. This show, actually, the first season of this show, this show was first introduced in his first season, his freshman season, as Houston was, kind of becoming a national relevant power in basketball that other people were paying attention to. And they're like, "Hey, we need a Locked On Cougs show." Really impressed with him. I really liked his first few games as a sophomore before his injury in the A&M game that year where he tore his Achilles. And frankly, I think this year, while there were spots that I really liked what he had to bring to the floor, the Achilles injury is kind of like a 2-year injury with 1 year off. And by that, I mean that you take 1 year where you don't play, obviously, roughly, 10, 11 calendar months or whatever. And then you still have a mental block, a physical block, a build yourself back up block, where he was kind of finishing up the second year of that 2-year injury on the floor in front of our eyes this year. And ultimately, again, he was a seventh, eighth guy on the floor, coming off the bench. He was in every game. He just wasn't necessarily seeing the kind of minutes I maybe would have projected him to be having as a third-year guy. As a freshman, he is a redshirt sophomore, got the medical redshirt from the injury. And I frankly, for being honest, still think he's a pro prospect. There's aren't many guys with that frame and wiggle and body control, truly able at the NBA level, could guard 1 through 4 the way that they're playing with the fours way spaced out, especially. I just am very confident that there will be pro organizations that take him, the frame, the intangibles, the athleticism, frankly, the fact that he's a fantastic kid. Almost just like the biggest loss here for Houston might be that we're losing a good kid, right? And stash him away and work on his offense, right? You could see the way that Houston, speaking about Houston, like the Rockets put guys in Rio Grande Valley to go, hey, work on this, work on that, work on your offensive game. We may talk to you a la Daniel House, right? Or whatever, right? I could see organizations taking that risk on him at the very least because of all of those factors, right? I think that to get to that point, though, he's going to need tape. He's going to need video of him getting competitive minutes. And as we looked at that depth chart, which I've now updated to take him out of the 2025-2026 roster, you look at, with him gone, the roster is 15 full, and that like 2, 3, 4 spot, right? Pop Isaacs being able to play a 2, KJ playing a 2, you got 5-star freshmen coming in, Kingston Fleming, Isaiah Harwell, Miles Usain, and Emmanuel Sharp as seniors on this team. That's a really crowded position very, very suddenly. And he needs video. He needs footage of him in the game for long stretches, playing important possessions. And I think this is just kind of a writing on the wall kind of thing where, unfortunately, as much as we want to be part of the program, that won't going to happen here, right? We've got all of this talent on the roster next season, and sometimes you got to do, got to also look out for yourself because no one else is, right? And so I totally get that. I am going to miss Terrance. I like Terrance a lot. Great bench energy, great teammate, looked like from all. And the people you talk to, people loved having him on the roster and on the team and the program. And frankly, there's a part of me too that I mentioned in the question of the day portion of the show. I loved having like Beaumont's own on the team. I think, that part of the state, the Triangle Rapids out of Houston, that's an important spot for this university. It's a really important spot for this program specifically. And it was nice to know that at one point in time, you had the best player from that part of the world on the roster there for a second. And at least in his class, that is. And I was excited when he committed. He was looking at Houston amongst a handful of other power programs. And I think people are kind of wondering, like, what's going to come next? What's he going to look at? I think the natural jump people are making is going to follow Coach Q, Quantas White, to Louisiana. I actually think he's going to end up in a Power 5 school. And I'm going to look at a couple places I think he could end up. I think there's one way he goes where he ends up at Maryland. Hear me out here. Coach Buzz Williams is now at Maryland, was at A&M, recruited Terrance hard to A&M. Really liked Terrance, really liked what Terrance could do for them at A&M. Buzz and Sampson were very similar defensive schemes, and Terrance would frankly fit right in like a glove. Also, for what it's worth, that's a Power 5 school that Terrance would go get on the floor for right away. They're losing Derek Queen to the NBA, losing a handful of other guys to the transfer portal because of the coaching change. He'd come in to be a fairly impactful guy at Maryland, a Big Ten school, very, very quickly. That's without even checking the NIL dollars they could offer. And they are a Big Ten school, right, and all that. So I do think that Maryland's one to keep an eye on here that feels like out of left field until you factor in that coaching change. He was really high on A&M out of high school. And so I think A&M's got to be on his list that you can see Terrance at as well. Nearby, SEC money. They're doing their own coaching change. They brought up a lot lesser known coach. So they're probably going to have to go out and get guys like Terrance. And Terrance probably going to looking at the guys they have in the roster right now. He'd probably get on the floor and play right away there as well. SEC is getting all the notoriety. If you want to get tape and video out there to the country, the SEC is the way to go. Similarly, I think Oklahoma had a down year last year. I know they put way too many SEC teams in the tournament, but Oklahoma did have a down year, right? I could see him there. He had them in his top 4 or 5 out of high school as well, right? And so I could see him ending up at either one of those SEC schools. And as gutting as that would be to be a nearby SEC school and not at the University of Houston, I think those are all opportunities that are really, really strong for him. Another left field one to keep an eye on, though, is University of Washington, UW. His high school teammate Wesley Yates started off at University of Washington, transferred to USC, and is now going back to the University of Washington. They were teammates at Beaumont United, did a whole lot of winning at Beaumont United, and that's a Big Ten school as well now after conference realignment in the fall of the Pac-12 and all of that. And I would not write off a reunification of those two, just like we talk about like Pops Isaac coming back to play, or coming to Houston to play with Milos and those kinds of things, or Cryer coming to play with Shed or whatever, right? Those bonds are real. And frankly, it'd be cool to see those guys go win some games together. Beaumont's guys up there in Washington winning together would be pretty cool as well. And I don't know what the best option for Terrance is. I'm confident he'll find it, and I'm hoping that he finds what he's looking for out there. I will say that Houston on the floor may find ways to replace and ways to cover up, and a bunch of five-star talents and that kind of stuff that they've got coming in, right? Like that all feels fairly secure to say. But Terrance was a guy that's been through the program for a while. Terrance was a guy that's been through the fire for a minute, and that part's hard to lose whenever it happens, even if it's truly best for both parties. And I think I speak for a lot of people and say I really liked watching Terrance play. I liked when Terrance was on offensively because it felt like, oh my God, it's starting every time that happened. And I hope he finds somewhere where that happens a lot more often, because I want it for you, Terrance. I want it for you. Go get it. All right, we're going to do some more talk about who else could be coming up next in the portal, because I don't think that whole thing is done either. But before we get to that, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at TurboTax, because this message from TurboTax is here to remind you that taxes was waiting, wondering, worrying if you're ever going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today, an expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, all while you get real-time updates on their progress. You can focus on the rest of your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available at TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates requires iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston, talking about transfer portal, talking about this roster right here, because I don't know if you guys can tell, the middle of that chart there, the 2025-2026 Houston Cougars are full. Even after Terrance Arceneaux's exodus, Houston is still at 15 people on the roster. You've got a handful of five-star freshmen there in Kingston Flemings, Isaiah Harwell, and Chris Sanak. Hard to imagine that there's a whole lot of movement out of young guys, because those guys are coming into play together. You also have Jacob McFarland, Chase McCarty, both high-end four-star guys that are redshirt freshmen coming in next year. Mercy Miller and Cordelius Jefferson being sophomores. That's a lot of guards if you've been paying attention so far. The junior class or third-year guys next year are Jojo Tugler and Sedlot. Sedlot has technically taken his redshirt year. He came in mid-season in the 2023-24 season to get some off-season work as a redshirt. We're not sure what class Pop Isaacs is going to be. I think he's going to get that medical redshirt and be a third-year technical guy coming in from Creighton, Texas Tech before that. But I still have him as an undecided as far as what year he is, because got to make sure that's official before going too far. And then your senior class, your fourth-year guys, your veterans, are Emmanuel Sharp, Miles Uzan, the transfer from Oklahoma, Khalifa Sacco from Sam Houston State, the big 6'11 guy coming in. And then we're still up in the air on if Ramon Walker is going to get that extra year of eligibility after another injury or not. So suddenly, that's 15 guys. Now, you do get 15 scholarships, but I think it's worth pointing out, and you'll notice a trend in 2023-24 and 24-25. Kelvin really likes to enter the season with 14. In large part, that's because even the deepest teams in America only run about 8 guys deep. That's just how basketball works. And if you're trying to get the most efficient usage of minutes and get your best guys on the floor the most you can, you end up only playing about 8 guys, right? So you want the best 8 you can. You want depth if there are injuries or things like that after that. And truthfully, the reason I've heard Sampson, I've heard him say it 2 or 3 times, but it's been a minute. You go in the season with 14 guys because then if chaos breaks out somewhere, in October or September, and suddenly there's some great player available who wants to come play for your program, get involved, you've got a spot for him. It doesn't make it a difficult decision to add talented guys that fit in, right? And so you always want that spot open. He's kind of that guy. So I think at 15, Houston will still probably have someone else on that roster leave. Now, we talked in yesterday's Locked On Coogs about how that could potentially be Ramon, right? If he does not get the medical clearance to come back for another year next year, boom, there's a spot. I am interested, though, in some of these other guys and what could come out of the other side of the transfer portal for them. For instance, I love Cordell Jefferson. Cordell Jefferson at Arlington Martin was a killer in high school. Played his senior year with what we'd later find out were 2 broken wrists. They didn't find that out until he got to the University of Houston that he played his senior year of high school with 2 broken wrists and was frankly at one point leading his size of the Metroplex or whatever in points per game. He's a killer, right? He's a killer. Tough guy, tough as nails. But if you look at the point guard rotation, you got Milo starting. Pop Isaacs can play some point guard as well. I think he and Milos will probably start together. You've got Mercy Miller. You've got Kingston Fleming. And Kingston's gonna play. He's tremendous. He's too athletic. He's too talented not to play at that point guard spot. I don't think Cordell can really play the 2 or the 3. And so suddenly you're looking like, where are the minutes coming from, right? Where is that going to work? And I will say there's 2 schools of thought here. One is KJ should follow Qantas or something and go to somewhere we can play right away, get on the floor, and then maybe transfer back into a Power 4 school or something like that, right? This other school of thought that was kind of the opposite, right? Where, okay, you look at that roster, yes, theoretically, minutes in 2025, 26 are going to be hard. But then you look at the guard potential in 26, 27, and if let's say Kingston's a great freshman year, does one and done, goes pro, or Isaiah or something like that. Suddenly, that guard rotation the following year is pretty thin, pretty sparse. Do you tough it out a season and say, okay, but I can be in the thick of it the following year when something really special could be happening because we're continuing to see this program move forward. And there's only so much farther forward it can really go, right? I don't know Cordell well enough or by any stretch to know what he's thinking on that. But I do think it's important to note both schools of thought for he and others are valid. That you see this incredible crop of freshmen coming in Kingston and in Isaiah and in Chris and for Rice as well, for what it's worth. And you're like, okay, if I can tough out maybe Ryan Moore Pine than I thought I would in 2025, 26, 27, if I'm also a young guy, if I'm also Jacob McFarland, if I'm also Mercy Miller, if I'm also one of those guys that's kind of in that same classification, there may be a lot more minutes for me then, and I'll have been in the system and be that much more veteran in it by then. The interesting thing to me is going to be what happens with that third big man, because I think right now, if I were a betting man, I'd bet that JoJo Tugler and Chris Sinak are the 2 starting bigs. Chris can truly play multiple 4 or 5 position type things. He can guard lots of positions. He can play on the perimeter with the ball in his hands. I don't know that I want him shooting a lot of 3s right now. I'm open to being proven wrong on that, though, Chris, so please prove me wrong on that. But I will say that he's comfortable out there offensively in a way that not everyone his size is. And so I could see him playing alongside JoJo Tugler. With that being the case, that means that Seth Lott and Khalifa Sacco, Jacob McFarland are kind of all competing for that first big off the bench. And we saw how important that was last year with Javier Francis, right? Javier, especially with JoJo Tugler's foul trouble, Javier was important in winning a lot of games. And had the national title game gone the way it probably should have gone, Javier's imprint on that game was pretty profound, right? And so I think it's important to find who that third big guy is in next year's team. And as I look at it, Stead's competing for it, Jacob's competing for it, Khalifa's competing for it. Khalifa's here, and Khalifa's coming in, he's transferring in. That's not going to change. I wonder, though, if you start seeing guys see that as being a crowded spot, especially a guy like Stead, who is in his third year of eligibility and has technically spent that redshirt year. And, he's looking at this like, okay, how do I really maximize my time? I will say that he has gotten so much better. He was also important at the end of the 2024 season when there were other injuries. He comes in and covers Hunter Dickinson in the home Kansas game where Houston blows out Kansas, right? Like, that's important. He has good tape to go transfer somewhere and play if he needed to. But also, he could also see the writing on the wall about like, well, Sinaxa one and done. Tugler may go pro as well. Suddenly, I'm the veteran big guy in the 26-27 team. Am I going to pass up being the veteran big guy on a Kelvin and Kellen, top of the country kind of team that year potentially? I don't know. I am interested to watch this happen. And of course, because I say something like, I don't know what's going to happen to someone I haven't mentioned, will throw them in the transfer portal by Friday afternoon, because that seems to be what happened on Thursday. But whatever the case may be, as much uncertainty as there is on that, I thought there was certainty on one thing happening this week with money in college sports and legal disputes and all of that. And I think we're still in a waiting period and stall. And while we're talking about the future of the Houston Cougar men's basketball program, this is the future of college sports, folks. And I don't know what's taken so long, but before we get there, Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here. Look, we're talking about the future of Houston Cougar basketball. We're talking about the future of college sports. In this segment, we're looking at the settlement that I thought was coming more definitively this week. Now, if you have not heard of the House settlement or anything's going on in that side of the money side of paying players in college sports, this is happening. I don't need a bunch of people saying, oh, I don't need it. It's happening. It's just how. It's not if, it's when and how. And the House settlement seeks to dissolve 3 different antitrusts. House is actually a former Arizona State swimmer, so shouts to the Big 12. They're suing the NCAA for damages for athletes who are not able to earn NIL money based on when they were in school and how much that hurt them based on the blow up of college sports and the potential marketing dollars they missed out on, right? House is functionally the headliner, really the first domino in this. And the settlement is coming because they're settling at around $2.8 billion when that's a fraction of the over $20 billion was estimated to potentially be if the case went to court and House won, right? So $2.8 billion for the NCAA feels like not a lot when you think about like, okay, but that's like a tenth of what it could have been potentially, right? Now, the $2.8 billion in back pay is going to all go to older athletes, and a lot of it's going to go to Power 4 alumni athletes that played in revenue sports, right? Just because that's where the bulk of that marketing dollar would have theoretically been spent, because in the present tense, as we see NIL dollars being spent, that's where the bulk of it's going there as well, right? That's the reality of that. But the interesting part about this is that in correcting this for the future, it's opening the doors for schools to be paying kids directly. The number has been tossed anywhere from 20 to at one point it's 23, at one point it's 22, at one point it's $22.5 million that institutions have to use as a salary cap for paying their athletes directly from the school. This does not cancel out or nix or get rid of NIL, but it was said in March that the first week of April we'd have a lot more clarity. Well, today is April 11th, we have no more clarity, right? And I think that we were all kind of thinking that once the March Madness tournament wrapped up on Monday night, that the following couple days would allow for this kind of news to really hit the news cycle and more things to get done on this. Instead, we're still sitting here as of the recording this podcast as a lame duck. And I don't know that that's good for the athletes, the institutions, or the fans, because all of this settlement talk and headway is acting as if this is starting July 1st, right? That's July 1st, 2025 is consistently the date that's getting thrown around every single time. Numbers change, that date doesn't, right? And so the closer we get to that date without any certainty, the more I worry that it's going to be just kind of haphazardly done, right? And I do think that we talked about before in this podcast, but Houston's got a pretty good plan where they're going to be competitive on the football side as far as the split of that $22 million goes, but heavy on the basketball side, because right now it'd be hard to argue you can't pay that basketball team top dollar. It's as top as anything gets, right? Interestingly, though, this week as well, from a Big 12 perspective, on Wednesday and Thursday, Brett Yormark, commissioner of the Big 12, and a handful of other high caliber kind of guys in that world, Greg Sankey, ACC, Big 10, all those guys, right? They all met with Congress on Capitol Hill seeking legislation in the NIL world. They wanted to kind of calm down the wild, wild west of this. And those conversations, it sounds like, are both in conjunction but dependent on this House settlement ultimately, right? Because the goal was for House to hit the settlement numbers to be hitting this month, and that way they could kind of start working with that in the NIL world. And ultimately, it's interesting to me that conferences and head coaches of big-time programs, long-time respected names in college sports, all followed Brett Yormark to Washington to talk about this with Congress, because the deal is that they need to have some more concrete legislation and details, because things are getting crazy. If you listen to Squad Joe, we talk about this fairly regularly, but like the kid from Wisconsin that went to Miami, when the NIL program said you can't not play for Wisconsin because our contract says so, he says, well, it says for while I'm a student here, I'm just going to unenroll and transfer like a normal student. And he did that. And then suddenly he's just not a student at Wisconsin, so the contract's null and void. And so finding ways to appropriately do this NIL thing where kids aren't getting taken advantage of, because we've seen the inverse of that, where kids sign up for NIL deals and they sign up for a school thinking they get an XYZ, and then they get there and it's more like ABC, and it's like, oh, I thought I was getting, and it's like, well, this is all backhand deals, shaking hands behind the cars and that kind of stuff. And I'm typically very pro player in these kinds of things, where I think if the coaches can take conversations from other schools while they're still under contract, I'm not really sure how you can legislate that the kids don't. It just doesn't seem fair to me. But also, I understand rooting for the Houston Cougars, and like I'd like to know the names of the guys on the roster. And I don't like that so much of this recruiting and transfer portal happens like while we're playing in the national championship game, right? Like that doesn't seem fair either as far as a Houston Cougar fan goes. So all of these coins are turning, and the balls are being juggled and things are being flipped around. And it just felt like, as we sit here on Friday morning, a lot more is going to be decided by now. And it's not. And I think that chaos about not knowing is super indicative of how the entire thing has been. And I've been checking on it and following it. I'd assumed we're going to have more information to talk about this week with Big 12, with NIL, with House, and all those kinds of things. And instead, we're going into the weekend. I'm sitting here saying, I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's a problem. We'll find out more, I guess, as we find out more. Whenever it happens, whenever more happens on, or more comes out on it, we here at Locked on Coogs. We've got a spring football game a week from Saturday. We've got to get back into football mode a little bit. We're also going to be following the basketball roster, any movement. 2026 basketball recruits are coming this summer and playing AAU basketball at a high level. We've got to be following them as well. Hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know when we're live here at Locked on Coogs, because Locked on Coogs is a proud member of the Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Coogs.